The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Detroit, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on Detroit. I'm doing out right on the target right now. I've got a 17 right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Today, I'm here with Thomas Van Hare, the creator of Historic Wings, an online magazine, a series of book games, and a YouTube channel. Let's not forget the modern media here. You probably know him from titles like Overflight, Mag 23, one of my favorites, or the newly released Speed Kings. How are you doing today, Thomas?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on. Greatly honored.
Good to have you on. And apparently I haven't had enough coffee. Normally we record at night, and so I'm well caffeinated. And early in the morning, I'm still not caffeinated. I'm on my second cup. So all the listeners will have to bear with us. But good to have you on, and good to talk about some projects, some games, some upcoming things that are going on for you for Historic Wings. You're going to laugh when I say this. I am a terrible podcaster. I said I was going to get to play this game Monday, and I will look out there at Rick and Miriam and all the people in my gaming group and go, "It's your fault we didn't play." No, we didn't get to it. We people showed up late. The live play ran longer. I didn't get to play Speed Kings, so I'm a little frustrated. But we'll still talk about it. We'll talk about the mechanics and some of the cool things in the game. But first, I want to talk about you and your background. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up starting Historic Wings and about your background, both, in aviation and as a wargamer.
Okay, well, Historic Wings started originally in 1997. In October of that year, actually on the anniversary date of Chuck Yeager's famous flight, when he broke the sound barrier.
Right.
And I published a little thing on the web about Chuck Yeager and the real story about what happened, and that he flew it with a broken rib and from a horse accident and so on. And it took off. It became very popular. And so what followed after that was the development of a complete online magazine, which used to be one of the top 10 aviation sites on the internet. And nowadays, of course, I don't really publish very much there. And from now and then, I still do, but I think we have about 450 articles about aviation history on Historic Wings. But I'm an old pilot, and I'm an old search and rescue pilot as well, and I'm a former senior White House official in 3 different administrations. And I have done aviation operations globally. I was even the president of an airline at one point, although it might be an airline that you would have flown on, but most people would never have flown on it because we did military operations. We did all of the air flights inside Iraq, for instance, and going to and from Iraq for the U.S. military. So we had a wide body 737 operation going into Iraq, into Baghdad from Dubai, and then we had regional turboprops going out to the FOBs or out to the other air bases, and then helicopters as well for FOB servicing and so on. So I'm an old aviation hand. I've been flying since the 1980s, and so aviation history has always been part of me and my family.
So thinking about history and gaming and the nexus of all those things, I'm the first to say not everyone has a good wargaming experience. And so it in my brief design career, the few games that I've worked on as a developer and as a designer, there's always bad inspirations. So I'll pose the question to you of what games did you either play previously, or what games were an inspiration for good or for bad? Because I always point to a lot of the games behind me on the shelf, like Air War, games that I enjoyed playing all 2 times I think I played it, which was both a good inspiration and a lesson in what not to do in aerial wargaming. So what were some of those inspirations for you?
Well, I think there's both positive and negative inspirations, exactly as you're saying. The most interesting aviation war game I think remains to this day the most well-designed in a way, although a little bit cumbersome, is Air Force Dauntless. If you remember the old battle.
Right. I have Air Force behind me here. Yeah.
Yeah. And
don't have Dauntless.
The common problem with all of the aviation war games, and this remains today, even with Birds of Prey, which is a brilliant system for modern air combat, is that you fly for hours. You play for hours to recreate 2 minutes of air combat or 45 seconds of air combat. Plotting your moves laboriously and determining, angle of bank and, what is your wing loading and how much power, thrust to weight ratio. And it's crazy, but you play 3 hours and you finally get one shot in, that's how most aviation war gaming has developed. And so I thought, no, we need to come up with a way to do aviation war gaming where you only have the good parts.
Right.
You only have when you shoot. You don't have all these maneuverings. We'll abstract that out because we assume that's going to happen.
Right.
And then, so we'll have squadrons on squadrons, not limited to 2 airplanes per player or 4 airplanes per player before it gets too cumbersome. But literally, you could have 30, 40 aircraft on a side and still play it. And that is what gave me the first game I released, which is called Tally Ho, which is about the Battle of Britain. And I still sell a lot of those, by the way. It's a very popular selling game. And it recreated squadron level air combat. So squadrons against squadrons over the English Channel and over Britain and northern France. Mag 23 was the second game that came out. And it actually tried and achieved the complete abstraction of air combat. You can actually play it without a map.
Right.
Without maps, counters, just in a notebook. And so there's no, I'm behind him and, he's going to pull up and he's got a better climb rate than I do. It's all abstracted out. And you get an incredible experience that very closely mirrors history. And the second thing that was very interesting to me is that all the war games that I had ever played only had like a few designer notes or a small paragraph about the history. And to me, being a historian, the most important thing was the history. We play the games in order to get a window into what it was like to have been there. What was it like to be on Guadalcanal, as part of the Cactus Air Force? And that experience is not actually just in the air. It's on the ground. It's fighting disease. The Japanese on the ground, getting shelled at night, having infiltrated.
all the other stressors no one talked about.
Dysentery. Yeah. And maintenance problems and fuel shortages and all of that is not covered in any game. And then you start to think, oh, the game must be huge, in order to have all of these things in it. Well, it's not. And, when you look at it, the book is quite thin. This is the rules and the history
exactly
of the Guadalcanal campaign for MAG 23, Marine Air Group 23, which is the first unit that got in there. And there were 2 squadrons in Marine Air Group 23. They were the F4F Wildcat Squadron and the SBD Dauntless Squadron, both Marines, by the way. So hats off to all the Marines out there. Amazing, amazing aviators. And these guys really suffered terribly.
Oh, yeah.
In the SBD squadron, one guy walked off the field at the end of the 10 and a half weeks of his deployment. Only one.
Absolutely.
The rest of them were casualties. They were down and out and gone. Many of them were dead.
Yep.
And they'd been airlifted out. The wounded ones were seriously wounded. They'd been airlifted out, and one guy was the last, in 10 and a half weeks. That's a pretty high attrition rate.
Absolutely.
And we saw that in this campaign is that everything about it was, a disaster. To manage it is not, you can play a single game of MAG 23 in about 15, 20 minutes. If you play it slow, it's your first time. Maybe it's going to be a 45-minute experience very fast. You're going to take off. Maybe you'll run into Japanese. Maybe you'll go after naval assets. Maybe you'll go after ground targets. But the game really comes alive when you play it as a campaign. And all your pilots are named. All of your, crews, as they come in, the new squadrons are arriving and flight, this comes in from the Hornet and, so on. They all arrive on and reinforce the island. And you're naming your pilots, and then you're watching them one by one, get serious wounds or even get killed. And some of them get shot down and they're dead. And then a week later, they turn up alive. And so it has all kinds of things about it that are quite unexpected in an air war game. And, as I said before, the metaphor was air-to-air combat.
Right.
And all about the technical accuracy of, the Zero could pull a tighter turn than the Wildcat. Well, as an aviator, I know that a 6G turn, whether you're in a Wildcat or a Zero, has exactly the same radius.
The question is, will you stay in that turn very long?
Yes. How quickly will you bleed off your airspeed? Exactly. How much power do you have to keep the airspeed up? It's induced drag is a killer, at high Gs. And, so I recreated that in a different way. Instead of trying to recreate, now I have to go 2 hexes before I turn and 60-degree turns on hexes and how many feet of altitude can I climb and so on. Instead, all of that is gone. There isn't even altitude computations in the game. You don't know whether you're behind the guy, in front of him, alongside. You don't know your relative positions to all of the enemy aircraft. You're placing formations against formations and rolling dice to see who's shooting and what the outcomes are. And it's that fast, and you're done, and you're flying home.
Well, I think there's an interesting evolution in aviation games. And I think the aviation game world split, and I don't know what year, but you look at Air Force and Dauntless, and even to a greater extent in Air War, games that tried to be simulations and walking that very fine line. Some, like Air War, really went heavy on the simulation. Birds of Prey. It is, in fact, more fun for me to fly DCS air combat than to play Birds of Prey, because that takes too long to do the level of detail I'm doing in DCS, an online simulator. But there was this belief that we needed to simulate aviation, where there are very few tank games where you simulate every part of the tank. I laugh with Roger Garish, for the designer of Achtung Panzer. There's a little bit of that there, because you have to determine what each crewman does. You have to determine which kind of round you load, but you don't have to seriously think about which tank track is going to be in which direction to get me to drive over next to the German house to take cover. But in aviation, for some reason, we have that need that we must simulate. But for the majority of people, I think, who enjoy the games, it's all the associated pieces of aviation. For MAG-23, understanding how fighter direction happens and understanding that it isn't always the things that happen at the pointy end of the spear. It's everything that got you there that set up the initial conditions for you to be victorious. And I think there's a lot more games today that explore that, and fewer games that explore the simulation. Let me perfectly model how the airplane flies.
Right. And I think, Birds of Prey has done it really, really well. And I've played that quite a bit. And it does it so well that as a pilot, I can tell you, I have an advantage over the war gamers. Yeah. Because I know where to position myself, on the shelf and drop down and so on. I know how to do that, and they really don't. Right. They put their nose on the target and hope they reach me.
And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I don't enjoy that game. And let me be perfectly clear. I've never played it. I've opened it up and I've looked at it and said, my God, man, that's what I do in a simulator. I don't really want to do that in the limited time I have to play a board game. So I always freely admit I go play things like Blood Red Skies, Beyond Megali, games that are very generalized, but still geometry means something, or understanding, maintaining advantage means something. I'm also one of those guys that hates pre-plotted movement, because as we've all been out there, and we were talking about it before we started recording, the ability for somebody to do instantaneously something you didn't expect, and you have to react to it, but you don't continue with 15 or 30 seconds of pre-plotted movement. You make a reaction, you roll the opposite direction, you reacquire sight, and you go on. So, but yeah, I think when I look, at a lot of the war games that I have in my shelves, there are a ton of games that I enjoy playing as a former aviator, but it's generally because they they scratch the itch of all the other aviation piece around it. And there's a few that I play to feel like I'm doing the piloting the aviation piece again. Those are usually cumbersome.
Yeah, no, it's really great. But again, I wanted to find the fun, but also the history.
Right.
And so all of my games are books. There's also boxed sets of them. And all of them focus on the history. So it's I created a new subgenre as an author, because you're never going to make a living publishing history books these days. People just don't buy a 300-page history book and read through it anymore. So I created this subgenre, which is half of a history book and half of a war game. And the more you read and understand, the more you can play better. And the more you play, the more you want to know more. So they're very popular in schools. They're very popular among people who like history, and it recreates the experience. In fact, there was a fellow named Scott Poulter. Poultergeist is his channel online on YouTube. And he did an entire playthrough every day on the anniversary of the actual day that MAG-23 was in combat. And the story is completely different than MAG-23, but also completely alike.
Well, and that brings up this huge discussion we've been having for the last few weeks with us, with the Anything But a One Adventures in Historical Wargaming podcast, a bunch of other podcasters, about it's all about semantics. What is a historical war game? And we've come to this point where we've started splitting out terms and realizing that some people play historical war games to do a reenactment. They want the results to be the same. They want things to all flow the same way. And like when I go to Historicon or a big event, I kind of scratch my head and I go, are we just pushing our little toy soldiers around like a bunch of reenactors? And we are, and that's fine. But when you understand that, then it's kind of a little bit liberating to go, oh, the battle is just going to go as it should have. We're fine. But then you find people that want it to be historically founded, but you as the player have agency. You as the player can really make the decisions and be, as we would say in the Marine Corps, on the horns of a dilemma with whatever problem that those officers and enlisted had that day in the fight, and try to decide those things, which, by the way, I find fascinating for MAG-23. I mean, it's historical segue here. So, kind of for people who don't understand the development of radar, and for people who don't understand the evolution of radar tactics, who all they've ever seen is Top Gun with a radar controller broadcasting on the radio, Maverick, your bandit is 150 for 20 miles at 17,000. They don't understand how archaic it was here at Guadalcanal. And you do a really good job, I think, in the book bringing that out. But I have to remind people, I mean, you had a technician very, very skilled in finding where the contacts were, and then had to analyze that, pass that over a landline to a fighter direction officer, who then had to make the decisions basically on the same plotting board that a ship's commander would use, or a ship's navigator, make those decisions and pass that to the fighters, who then could do their job and visually acquire the enemy and attack them. And it's an interesting
they weren't
loop.
really getting live updates as they flew.
Right.
They were told before takeoff, expect X number of Betty bombers and 15 Japanese Zeros flying at 22,000 feet, coming into Guadalcanal from the northwest. They're currently 35 miles out.
There's your generic sector, somewhere in the northwest.
And they would take off and fly up and climb up to 24,000 feet, knowing that they had to look down. And so, but finding that information was a masterpiece of, brain power by this fellow named Master Tech Sergeant Dermot McDonnell.
Yep.
And he took a system that literally only gave a bearing and a distance, nothing more. And it was the raw radar reflection that, gave a little spike on the oscilloscope for the distance. And where that, then there was another, which was a circular disc that had a line that showed in which direction it was. And from those two things, he was able to determine altitude, heading, speed, and the composition of the force.
Mm-hmm.
And down to the number of zeros, the number of Bettys, the number of Vals, the number of Kates. Truly an extraordinary thing. And how he did it is beyond belief. And this guy, what he did remained so classified after the war that he's not written into any of the official histories.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things people forget is also how new radar was and how classified it was, as you're talking about, and that some things were still so classified about what we did in World War II by the time of Vietnam, because not much had changed. When you look at how Red Crown operated, we had now taken the fighter direction, the voice, this little landline between the fighter direction officer and the radar, we'd gotten rid of. The radar, the individual operating the radar was the one talking to the airplanes, but they were still doing that same thing. They were watching the number of squiggles. They were looking how the radar returns processed to go, oh, that's a MiG-21. Nope, those are MiG-17s. Okay, they're in a 3-mile trail formation. And because they weren't what we see in the movies now, these wonderful little data link tracks that show you where every bad guy is, which the real world doesn't work that way anyway. But it was not at all like in the movies. And so we forget that some of this stuff we held close until the 70s, 80s, because it was just how the technology was.
Right. So this guy was never written into the official histories. And so he's forgotten, but he's perhaps the one Marine in history that changed history.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I've reached out to a couple of my peers that were they were in the MTACs, they were in the Marine Air Command and Control System, and in the tactical direction that, as we call the TADS, the Tactical Air Direction Center. They were, or the Tactical Air Operations Center as well, the TAOC. They were fighter directors and guys like that. And I'm like, okay, you guys tell me what was taught at the schoolhouse, because that's the other fascinating part of history. And we, especially as Marines, are terrible about this. We, in our own culture and in our own little cult of the Marine Corps, because we are a cult, in our own little cult, we know who our heroes are and we know what they did. And we are absolutely terrible about getting those stories out to everybody else. And fighter aviation is that way. It's so funny when I will talk to my friends about people that are big names in fighter aviation to us as F-18 guys. And they're like, but don't you care about so-and-so and so-and-so? I'm like, nah, they're all over the history books. We don't care about those guys.
Right. This is a celebration of Marine Corps aviation history.
Right.
And if you look at Guadalcanal games, they're all land battle games.
They are.
And the story of Guadalcanal is all in the air. And it's all Marine Corps air. And somehow that has been lost in wargaming. And I don't understand why.
Well, and I'll tell you, this is an interesting segue into the cult of the Marine Corps and how marine aviation is today. Is Guadalcanal was such a tipper event for marine aviation that it has driven everything we've done up until today in acquiring the F-35B. Mm-hmm. If you think the Marine Corps bought the F-35B because we had the AV-8 and we liked little airplanes that flew off vertically off of little carriers, you don't understand the historical baggage of Guadalcanal. And I tell people that I had senior Marine officers when I was a young captain, junior major, still remind me, don't forget the Navy left us at Guadalcanal. The Cactus Air Force is what saved the Marine Corps there. And that cultural touchstone drove everything we did that said, hey guys, everyone else may abandon us, but we're the Marine Corps. We stick together. We need airplanes that stick with our grunts, and we'll make it through.
Yeah, exactly correct. The thing is, this story of Guadalcanal, the game allows you to experience it firsthand as if you were in command. And all of those issues about fuel shortages and Japanese naval bombardment at night, and your pilots are coming down with dengue fever and dysentery and all that, you're managing that.
Yes.
You're managing the entire thing. And yet you've still got to deliver on the lethal requirement to defend the island against really incessant Japanese attacks from the air.
Absolutely.
And yeah, you will have aces. And yes, they will get shot down. And some of them, you may think they're dead and they'll walk back out of the jungle a week later perfectly alive. What a surprise. Others, they are dead. Some of your best guys will get seriously wounded. in one of the games that I know, one of the top aces that the guy had developed and put all of his efforts into fostering him as the leading guy, is killed by naval gunfire.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and these kinds of things actually happened, and it was a terrible place to fight. You know, in Guadalcanal was a great equalizer. The environment, the temperatures, the rain, the conditions, the dust. It's the only place on the planet where you can have dust and rain at the same time. And
I don't know. I always go back to the biblical thunderstorms in Iraq and Afghanistan, where it could be blowing dust and it could rain mud sideways. I would come back to that one and I would be like, am I about to experience a plague of locust because mud is now flying sideways? But yes, no, I know what you're saying about South Pacific Islands and you know, South Pacific. I spend time in Malaysia, Singapore, and other places for work. And people forget that in tropical climates, when it goes dry, it goes horribly dry. And it's just miserable because it's baked for however long that dry season is with no rain. And then finally it becomes rainy season again. Yeah.
But, you know, Mag 23 and Tally Ho are only two of the games that I've developed. There's many, many others. And they all sell very well. One of the most interesting games is a war game called Overflight.
I have that one hiding behind back there. Yes.
This is a U-2 game where you are the CIA director of the U-2 program. And your mission is to overfly the Soviet Union, which we did from 1956 to 1960. And then the program ended when Francis Gary Powers was shot down. And
we flew out of a lot of surprising places people didn't know we flew out of.
Yeah, exactly. And all of that is in this game. And you have all of the aspects. Francis Gary Powers Jr. submitted materials for this book as well.
Oh, nice. The
entire book is deeply researched. Had I published this 10 or 12 years ago, I would go to jail. I put a TS.
See, I hadn't even opened that in there. Now I'm going to have to rip that page out and shred it.
Yeah. No, but it says approved for release on it and everything.
Oh, good.
And the missions that are signed in the book are in the CIA black.
Yeah. Oh, funny. Nice.
And they're all historic. Everything it has absolutely historic missions that you fly. But how do you fight a war game when you don't have any guns?
Exactly.
You don't have any armor even on your airplanes.
Yep.
The only thing that you have is altitude to save your life. And so the game recreates that. But it recreates it. So when you fly missions, you are the lone pilot flying over the Soviet Union. But overall, you are the CIA's program director for the U-2 overflight program. The talent was the code word for it. And yeah, I mean, that program is an extraordinary one in history. And the game gives you a full insight down to the level that depending on your success and failure on each mission, Eisenhower may step in and stop the program. And so on. I mean, it's all of that mission you'll have diplomatic protests filed. You'll have diplomatic notes coming in from countries that you weren't supposed to overfly, but you had to because the plane had received some, had run low on fuel and had a malfunction in the fuel system. And so you ended up overflying Sweden on the way to, and so on. And that's a neutral country and so forth. And so, that's another one. And there's another called Battle of Palmdale, which is, it's one of the least popular games, but the most fun to play. It's almost like a beer and pretzels level game, although it mimics aviation quite well. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the U.S. Navy took off with an F-6F 5K drone. They were testing the first generation of air-to-air and surface-to-air missiles. And they were doing it north of Los Angeles. They took off. They were all radio-controlled drones, and then they would, fire the missile to see if they could down it, and often they missed. And we learned a lot. And it's 1950s era stuff. And that day they took off with the drone, and it made a left turn instead of flying straight out over the Pacific, and flew directly over downtown Los Angeles.
Yes,
pandemonium broke out. Absolute pandemonium, people running around. I mean, it's like a bad Hollywood movie, And the Navy didn't have any assets ready to take off to try to shoot it down. So they called on the Air Force, and the Air Force had its bomber interceptors, F-94, interceptors, which had the Mighty Mouse air-to-air rocket, which was designed to shoot down Soviet bombers, big, lumbering bombers, not a small fighter plane, right? And each of those aircraft carried 104 rockets. And they were impact fused, not proximity fused. And so they went out over Los Angeles County, highly populated Los Angeles County, and tried to shoot this thing down by firing volleys of 42 and 40 and 36 rockets at a time. And all of those rockets missed, of course. And every rocket that they fired fell to earth invariably, hit the
landed
ground,
somewhere,
exploded. And when you're talking about pandemonium in Los Angeles County, imagine there's an airplane flying overhead, no explosives on it or anything. Everybody's afraid where it's going to hit. The Air Force shot 208 rockets at it and missed every time. And 208 rockets fell across Los Angeles County, setting wildfires, blowing up buildings, trucks, cars, residential homes were hit. It's just unbelievable. And incredibly, no one died.
Right.
And in the game, you can either play the drone or you can play the F-94s. If you play the drone, it's an unmanned drone, but you're trying to outfox the AI, which is trying to chase you down and shoot you down. But the most fun, really, I think, is when you play it as a multiplayer game, and somebody plays the drone and the other guys play the F-94s and try to shoot it down. But that's another one of the games, probably the best-selling game.
Well, I will hold you on that for a second, because here's a funny side story to that. It goes back to people not telling history. That's a well-known story in Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, that in the test and eval community, that story is recounted so many times and is so, I don't want to say legendary, but it is among all the stories we tell of all the stuff that has ever gone wrong, is that, hey, do you remember the time the Navy launched a drone and it didn't go out to sea and I didn't know the full story behind it until I picked up the game, but it was one of those standard things of, lots of times we've launched drones and they've gone in the wrong direction. But it was funny to then pick up the game and go, oh, wait a minute. This is that story of the Hellcat that didn't do what it was supposed to do. And linked
I was
into
just
a game.
Completely out of control. The Navy guys on the ground with the, controllers were like, turn right. It's not turning. It's turning left. Oh my God. Where's it heading now? Well, hopefully it'll just circle back. And no, it's leveled out and it's heading straight from downtown Los Angeles. Maybe we better call the mayor's office, right? Yeah. And then the mayor's office calls the police and says, we've got a Navy, out of control Navy airplane flying.
What are we going to do?
And law enforcement puts cars in the street, stopping traffic. Like that's actually going to do anything. And people are running for shelters. And, nobody had any idea what was coming. They didn't know if it was a huge bomber loaded with weapons and nuclear weapons, or, a small fighter drone. Nobody communicated anything. So if it could have gone wrong, it did that day. And they set, hundreds and hundreds of acres of land on fire. And they burned out and destroyed so much. It's really extraordinary. And, nobody was really thinking. And the Air Force is on the phone with the pilots, on the radio with the pilots calling them saying, you've got to shoot it down and prove the Air Force can save the Navy, and the Navy is, calling the Air Force saying, shoot it down. And so the pilots are getting these conflicting messages of, no, don't shoot it down. You're over a populated area. No, now you have to shoot it down. No,
you have to shoot it down.
Risky. Shoot it down anyway, and all of that is in the game. So, but another one of the games that I have is called Game of Drones. This is actually the public release version of a U.S. military and NATO PME game that we teach in Historic Wings. We've done it in Sweden and Denmark and elsewhere. And we show how drone warfare actually works on the front lines. This was done in coordination in conjunction with Ukrainian drone pilots. And so it's now over a year old, but it's completely up to date on the real challenges that you face on the front lines. And for PME purposes, it's extraordinary. It's not a solitaire game. It's a public release version. It's a solitaire game. Military version, you have 20, 25 people mimicking the entire command structure, multiple drone teams, the entire frontline battlefield area. And battle space management and coordination of information and drone teams is the bigger challenge. It's not
That's
about
something that's
technology.
not done very well in a lot of aviation games. Rarely do aviation games model the command and control. They model the pilot's actions. They model the crew. They don't model all of those friction points that get people to the pointy end of the spear at the merge when things happen.
Mhm.
But generally, stuff can derail well before that, as we know from careers in aviation. That you can. The information the command and control systems give you can set you up to fail before you ever get to the objective area.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that my games do is they try to merge all three of those levels of strategic, operational, and the tactical into a compelling, realistic, accurate game that represents history. They're also deep in narrative. And often with narrative wargaming, you have this lack of player agency is what it's called. There's no real meaningful decisions. You fly from point A to point B, roll dice to see if something happens. You then fly from point B to point C, roll dice to see if something happens. And you're recording like an unfolding story that is based on the dice rolls, not on your decisions.
Right.
That's a problem with many narrative games today. And it's something that I've focused on fixing and in all of my games. Probably the most narrative-focused game with the most decisions is SOE Lysander.
Yeah, I saw that
And if
one.
you've never played this game is so accurate to the flight experience of covertly inserting special forces operators into occupied France during World War II that we play tested it among pilots. And they did fine. We published this. It went out to war gamers, and they couldn't live. They couldn't survive. And they didn't know how to think like a pilot.
Yeah.
The pilot would fly forward and say, rain, I've got a fuel system problem.
Yeah.
The engine is running rough. There's a night fighter up ahead. I'm dodging around below the clouds here, and I can't really figure out exactly where I am. You know what? I'm running low on fuel. I'm going home. And we'll try this tomorrow night.
Yep.
The war gamers said, "Oh, I better make this dice roll and roll the dice." And of course, it doesn't work out.
That's a fascinating experience, because that was one of the biggest frustrations. And we can talk about it with game designer notes and things you wish you tell people when you write games. But when I helped co-design Fulcrum Leader, one of the things was to tell people there are missions you should not go on. There are missions you should abort when you get airborne.
Absolutely.
If you fail a campaign because you didn't get enough victory points, but you brought all of your squadron members home, I call that a victory as a squadron commander. It's one of those things where gamers want to win, and gamers are like, I don't think I can get enough VPs and have enough aircraft left. And I go, that could be real combat. You might have to make that decision that today isn't the day we're going downtown. The deck is stacked against us with weather, with crew swaps, with aircraft issues. You know what? We're not going downtown today, boys.
Yeah. And, this kind of realism is not about, whether the plane turns more, how much it turns in a 45 degree versus a 55 degree bank. It's not about that at all. This kind of realism is telling a story where you don't actually have to worry about managing the mechanics of flying the airplane.
Exactly.
And one of the things about all of my games is that they include a lot of original research. They include, regular history research, of course, but also there's original research. In this one, for instance, the main panel includes a map of France, and it includes the locations of each of the French resistance cells.
Right.
It's never been put together on a single map before in history.
I tell you, I enjoyed in Mag 23 the level of things that were put together, and this is going to seem super minor. You're going to laugh when I say that, and it's kind of our segue to Speed Kings. But in Speed Kings, all the photos and all the visuals, especially because I also bought the boxed set on the cards of historic race aircraft sitting, at a race field at somewhere in Kansas, all of those different things. I enjoyed just the visuals of that game because for me, that had never been connected to one spot. It was always somewhere on the internet. You read a cool story. Someone did an article. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that about air racing. Or from my work in aviation photography, shooting some aircraft that participated in air racing, you would still learn little bits of it. But with Speed Kings, all of that was in one place. And that was super cool to me because it meant, at least as a gamer and as someone interested in history, I wasn't going out finding 7 books to read and building a composite picture out of that. It was all in the game.
So. Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, there's about 20 books here that I bought. Speed Kings. It's the level of research that goes into these is pretty extraordinary. And,
oh yeah.
Probably the most deeply researched one.
Yeah.
And the most interesting in terms of its depth of gameplay, and actually the easiest to play, but people are a little bit afraid of it because it's quite a thick book, is Black Flight, which is World War I air combat. And again, it abstracts out all of this air combat stuff except altitude.
Right.
And you manage a squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, number 10 Squadron. And number 10 Naval comes into play 1 month, less than 1 month after Bloody April. Mm-hmm. The RFC is decimated. The Germans, all these great German aces, this is when they rolled up their first great kills. They just cleared the skies of Allied aircraft. The RFC lost something like 250 pilots and aircraft in that time, plus all the other air crew members and so forth. They were so defeated that they withdrew from the battlefield. And the Royal Naval Air Service was sent in to fill the gap while they rebuilt, trained new pilots, built new airplanes, and so forth. And this one squadron shows up. And one flight of one squadron called Black Flight, which is the B flight of the 3 flights in the squadron. This one flight, basically 5 pilots actually. The normal flight was 6, but they were under strength, so they only had 5 pilots. Turned the tide. Between them, they shot down most of the German aircraft. This is less than a month after Bloody April. And they single-handedly did it. 5 guys basically did this. And 2 of them didn't make it through. So at the end, there's 3 guys left. And they're in the fight for about 11 weeks. And they changed the course of the war. So they were expected to be sacrificed. That the RFC thought, well, that's it. We're going to see the RNAS now get completely annihilated. And worse than that, they fly the Sopwith triplane, which the RFC has rejected because it's, it looks like a flying staircase. And we really don't want a triplane. Turns out the triplane design was absolutely brilliant. It was the best triplane of the war until the DR-1. The Germans were so impressed by it that they launched a triplane craze in German aviation. And they designed dozens of triplanes, all of which failed terribly until Fokker did the
Fokker one. Which, and Steve, one of the other guys on the podcast, teases me about hating World War I aviation games, but so many of them are so much of the pilot-centric piece of it, and when you get between all the varying types of aircraft as you go from biplanes, triplanes, monoplanes, and you're trying to simulate the differences in all of that, there's a point where I go, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Because it is such a rapid evolution of aviation technology. For me, the interest is the narrative piece of the game. What did it mean to be a stopgap squadron? What did it mean to be an Army cooperation squadron? All those different kind of things that you find in World War I aviation that a lot of times just aren't covered. And it's everyone thinking about the Knights of the Sky, everybody up there dogfighting and how cool their airplane was versus all the others. And that's why I have Richthofen's Wars hiding somewhere over there. If I want to do that, I'll play that game again.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I have to look behind me and realize some of my games I think are still over there. So I've got to migrate some of my aerial war games over.
And so what I find most interesting about World War I air combat, or Great War, because of course it's only after World War II that we begin calling it World War I, because we didn't think it was going to be another
Great War aviation.
War. It was the war to end all wars, right? But what happened was, nowadays, if you said the pilot was drunk, he'd be tossed out of the squadron. But in World War I, that wasn't the case at all. Yeah. Pilots were, the average life expectancy in April 1917 was weeks. Some people said down to 11 days in some sectors of the front was the life expectancy. And so these guys had, they were alcoholics, womanizers, they, cowardly, refused to take off. Sometimes they turned around, left their squadron leader, to die. All kinds of unbelievable things that we wouldn't see in a modern disciplined Air Force. But in those days, it was the norm for people to be really rather interesting characters. And the game actually recreates that. The pilots you have are not just named, and now they fly the same airplane and you fly them and so forth. They all have individual traits and vices. And the more bad things they see, the more times they see their buddies shot down. Even seeing German airplanes get flamed and the guy falling out of the airplane on fire, it causes PTS, combat stress. And so the game recreates combat stress. As you see more of these things, you get more vice cards. So your leading ace might end up an alcoholic.
Right.
He might end up not just an alcoholic, but somebody who refuses to take off for morning patrols because he's, sleeps.
He knows how those odds are.
And the game recreates the squadron commander's experience. And you have a stable of pilots to manage that are very, very unique in their characteristics. And those characteristics evolve as you play.
We've talked about that on the podcast, how difficult aerial morale is to model, because people think of morale for ground units and for units breaking and falling back in order/disorder, that there's a difference in morale, and that they tend to forget that for aviation, it's a lot of individual decisions or crew decisions made up into a larger whole, and that there are individual morale decisions on, do I go into the target? Do I at least try? Do I say, nope, okay, too much of a threat going home today? Or do I just not even take off and come up with a maintenance excuse why my aircraft is broken? All of those are morale issues that are then magnified as operational concerns. Now I have fewer aircraft airborne, or the guys that were supposed to sweep the fighters, they didn't go to the target area, so now my strikers have to deal with fighters. So I think there's fascinating morale decisions in all of those things that we don't always cover.
Yeah, I mean, you have to manage your pilots. You might send some on leave to try to reduce their combat stress. And they come back 3 days later from Paris and maybe
still drunk. The police are looking for them now.
Lost something else. Some of those vices they've managed to put back away.
I can say that happens regardless of whether it's combat or not. And I share this story just so people understand that aviation is one of those funny organizations of high stress, type A personalities, and people invariably choosing the wrong time to blow off steam. I was having a wonderful exercise in Greece. I was not flying. I was on the ground. I was part of the Tactical Air Command Center in the Marine Corps, which, if you know, is simply a tent with radios. And we're not allowed to talk on the radios. We only listen to what's on the radios. We don't talk as the TAC. So we're there, and I'm looking forward to that first weekend. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to get to go somewhere in Greece. I've never been to see anywhere in Greece. And the Thursday prior, a Marine C-130 crew, after having a lot of flights and a lot of work put in, got in trouble in Crete and beat up a Greek policeman. So needless to say, for the rest of the exercise, Doug did not leave the base. Doug did enjoy his 2 beers on a Friday night, I think, at the beer tent. But other than that, it was eating in the chow hall or the souvlaki truck, drinking Pepsi with my souvlaki on a stick. Yeah. Aviators blowing off steam at the wrong time is part of history. And I think it's funny that you've got that in the book, in a sense, with building up that stress and that showing how there's a level of unhealthy stress that you just don't compensate with, that you may be achieving, but your stress is now detrimental to everything.
Well, your squadron in this, you're probably going to lose half of your guys
in
the course of the game. In 10 weeks of gameplay, you will lose half your guys.
Right.
And you better believe the other half are suffering with severe issues. And when you order them into the air, and the replacement guys are quite green at the gills, around the gills, and it's when you order them into the air, maybe they don't fly. Right. And or maybe when they encounter the enemy, half of them turn tail and run. And this actually happened in the First World War, and we don't like to talk about it. Instead, we talk about all the great aces and everything else. But the real experience is a bunch of regular guys thrown into hell.
Let me put a pin on that and say, we don't talk about it happening in Vietnam. And as I was doing some research for the VMFA 333 shoot down, I never realized they had a second section, another flight of 2 airborne at the same time, that actually flew into the same engagement. Those guys looked around, didn't see anybody, and said, if we don't see where the bad guys are, we're out of this fight. And they didn't just leave the fight, rebuild their situational awareness, and come back in. They left the fight and went back to the boat. So I remind people that the judicious decision to not stick around, that happened a lot. And I don't want to pick on people and say, oh, that was a cowardly thing to do, because the real time when you're sitting in that seat and you're trying to decide, do I stick around with low situational awareness or disadvantageous position? We always talk about never push a disadvantageous fight. There's a lot of times, even in modern aviation, people look around and go, didn't see the target. My radar warning gear is going off. Didn't see the bad guys. Yeah, we are out. We're not going to stick around. It's a bad situation.
It's exactly true. In World War I, we didn't have the level of discipline that we have today.
Yeah. Yep.
Training wasn't there. The discipline wasn't there. The professionalism that we have in modern aviation did not exist.
Yeah.
These guys, just a few years earlier, they're flying a Blériot, if they're even flying at all. Most of them have just a few weeks of flight time, and they're arriving at the front with less hours than the average American private pilot gets before he solos, and then they're going into combat.
Right.
And most of them didn't survive. And the thing is about aviation, it's about discipline. Mm-hmm. And so the story that you get out of Blackflight, you could literally play the game, record it in a log, and write a novel about an aviation squadron in the First World War. And it would be a compelling story. It's at that level of narrative that you get out of it. And the number of decisions you have to make is extraordinary. None of these games are roll your way through tables to the completion. Every one of them have decisions, not just a few, hundreds of decisions. And your decisions are very consequential. So it matters a lot. And, in aviation, we have a perfect record. We have yet to leave an airplane up there. So one way they're coming
one way or another, they're coming down.
And in this game, it recreates that. One way or another, they're coming back.
Yep.
And maybe in a box. It's terrible. War is a terrible thing. And it would be just so wonderful if we could just fly without any risk or threat in the world and fly and see all the sights and everything. But it isn't that way.
Nope. No, it's not.
The games that I recreate conflict. Mm-hmm. And they recreate the stress of it and the stories of it. And many of the stories are almost identical to historical stories or related to in many ways. They sound like the same, but they're different. If you try to, if you play Mag 23 to the end, the story of your experience will be completely different from the real one, but also very similar.
Right.
And you will learn what was actually faced. The decisions you make early on, how many planes you put up to fight the Japanese will affect your later ability to fly because you may not have the fuel. And, it's all wonderful to have 25, wildcats on the ground waiting. If you don't have the fuel to fly, you're not flying. The Japanese bombers are going to come and they will bomb the base.
Right.
And you can always win. You can always win any air fight because you can always put up more airplanes than the Japanese are going to fly. Pretty much it's going to be like that. You can focus your force and just hit the valves. There's 12 valves and you come in with 20 wildcats. You're going to win. You're going to do it. You're going to knock those valves out of the sky. If you put up 5, maybe not. Probably not. Right. But if you put up 20, you'll do it. Well, all that's fine and good. But then later on, another 2 weeks down the road, well, all that gas you used having a turkey shoot, you don't have. And here come the Betty bombers with a heavy bomb load, and they are going to annihilate Fighter 1 in Henderson Field.
Exactly.
That happened. That's history.
Yeah.
And the game recreates that. So we should talk about Speed Kings.
Well, let's segue into Speed Kings because that was the motivator to start this. Although, like I said, I've looked at the games and the books for so long and had not jumped in, even when Mag 23 came out, and then finally I'm like, okay, I've got all of my side projects pushed away. I can start thinking about this series, and I jumped in by buying Speed Kings first because it was the latest. So let's talk about air racing as a game and why you may laugh when I say this, why something that may seem so dynamic has a very procedural way of going through the game. So let's talk about just the overall. I call it procedural because it's people would think, well, I care about, how I'm going to move for every little 6 inches and 3 inches. No, you just hit very specific gates. And at those gates, you make decisions. And those decisions, they drive your placement around the board. And I think that's surprising for people because if you said an air racing game, they're going to think you're moving, every couple inches and it's got to be hex based. And it's not at all, which was a definitely a surprise to me.
Yeah, again, it's I've taken this concept of how do you simplify it down to what it really is.
Yes.
And eliminate all of this, the weight of technology and physics and aerodynamics, and just preserve the fun part. And the game is a lot of fun. I mean, you can do an air race in 15 or 20 minutes and have a blast. And you don't have yet.
I don't have the miniatures.
The miniatures.
I'm jealous.
These are where it's at. Yeah. We played with this at Punched Con in England, and it was one of the most popular. In fact, it was one of the dominant games of the entire show. I had people, an ending stream of people coming to play, and we just played game after game after game.
A terrible problem to have.
It was wonderful. Every airplane is different,
Yeah, yeah.
And they all have different performance, and the pilots have different performance. And so the actual, this is the Bulldog. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hall Springfield Bulldog, but just look at that shoulder wing there. I mean, that's
cool.
That's like
that
the PZL P11. And of course you have the GB. You're familiar with the GB.
Absolutely.
Very
that's
famous
cool.
airplane. Most dangerous thing you can fly in the sky. And that's reflected in the game as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the game has some interesting characteristics because one of the things that makes it really playable and compelling is that it's quite easy to fall from first place to last place. If you make a mistake going around the pylon, it takes you a while to get back up to speed to recover from that mistake. And the entire field will pass you.
Yes.
And it's reflected that in the game. But to actually pass another guy around the course, if they don't make a mistake, is incredibly difficult. Mm-hmm. So the way the game handles that is the game is played as a series of challenges against the aircraft ahead defender.
Correct.
So each pair of airplanes, so to speak, of course, if you have two tied, then they challenge together the guy ahead of them. Right. But each position challenges the position ahead. So you start at the front. The front guy is defending P1, position 1, and he's defending it against the guy at P2. And if there's 3 guys tied at P2, he's defending against all 3. And depending on, what he chooses to play, when he chooses to play it. He's going to succeed, and he moves forward to the next pylon or straight on the course. The guys following then have to defend using what they played. They now have to defend their position against the guys behind.
Correct.
So you can pass sort of one position ahead, but you can lose all the way to the back. So the farther you get to the front, the more precarious it becomes to stay there.
Right.
And you can lead through the whole race and then, lose it at the last pylon crossing the finish line. I mean, it's
well, and to talk about the mechanics a little, let me grab the beautiful boxed set.
Thank you.
I don't do unboxings because everybody else does unboxings, but I got to say that opening this up and digging through the components was fun, because with a lot of games that you buy that are book games that you can either cut out and sleeve the cards, or you can print them off of the stuff on Board Game Geek. It was nice to finally open up a game and once again get, cards that are all already printed off. But that's one of the key components, is that you've got a hand that you've got to get through that lap, and you've got to figure out how to balance what's going to happen where. And and I shouldn't say guess, because it is not a guess. It is a tactical estimation of when you're going to be challenged. And if you burn yourself early to hold your position, you may find fewer options on the backside as you get around to the backside of the route.
And there's something else which is kind of an interesting mechanic in the game, is if you push, you're allowed to push your speed and push, the tightness of the corner and so forth, but you're creating wear on the engine and wear on the aircraft. And so by the end of the race, you're flying this worn out bird that, and hopefully everybody else has done the same. And then everybody's flying worn out birds against other worn out birds, and it's going to come out okay. But if somebody is able to carefully manage and husband their resources, then at the end, they can start pulling right through the field and win the race. And so it's, you're dealt cards, which are speed cards. And people say, well, if I get a good hand, then, I'm going to win, right? Well, it's not that at all. It's absolutely not that. In fact, because there's so many cards in the game, if you play 3 laps and you've got, 5 or 6 pylons here, you're going to be playing with maybe a set of hands in the 3 laps that you might add up to having 70 cards, out of the 90 that are in the deck at various times. Really what the cards are doing is providing strategic variance. And that strategic variance creates the different experiences within each lap. And so the way players, it's all about, when do you dump the low cards you have? When do you think the other guy is going to dump the low cards that he has? And so it's guessing, getting into their head and watching for patterns.
Yes.
And initially, at PunchCon, we saw this happen, that people would play the first time and they would, it's probably just, whatever chance. And then they'd come back and they'd play a second time, and they'd come back and play a third time, and they'd have some new people. And in the third race, they've now got a lot of experience on how to do this. And suddenly they're winning every race because they're flying against new guys that are thinking, it's just about cards. They're getting into their heads saying, wow, now he's going to dump his low card here. I can see that based on his patterns. And so they become quite expert at it. And so
that's why I want to play this with a large enough group, because when we go to conventions, we generally participate in Aerodrome in those games. And I liken Aerodrome to a parlor game. Yes, it has airplanes on stands. Altitude means something. You have performance characteristics, and there are certain maneuvers you can and can't do. But the fun of playing this game is playing against the other side of the table and watching their reactions as everybody's pre-plotting their moves and then executing them. Because it's, to me, the fun of it is seeing, or I should say, is driving the other people to do things or to react when you literally didn't do anything. And you're flying straight ahead, but they're like, oh, what did he plot? Oh, I think he plotted to shoot. I don't, and so it's it's just it's a parlor game in that sense. And so I almost want to have a large enough group when we do Speed Kings, when we do play it in our group, that it's not just me playing against one or two other people, that there's enough of us in the pack that there is an element of, I don't know what Miriam did with her cards last turn. I wasn't paying attention, which did she get rid of a low card or a high card? And you find yourself, trying to think ahead in that way.
Yeah. One of the things is that it can be played solitaire.
Right.
2-player, 3-player, 5-player, 9-player in the base game. You can have 9 players around the table. It's played on the regular tabletop. You can make the course short. You can make it long. There's historic courses included, which were very difficult to research because there aren't maps of how they place the pylons, in Los Angeles and so forth. But all of these races from the 1932 season and such, 31, 32 season are covered in the game. And those courses are actually there. The best estimate based on all available materials that I researched, that took weeks of time to develop that. And if you play these scenarios, the races in order, you can recreate those seasons.
Right.
And in the advanced, if you want to call it the advanced game, it's a simple rule. If you win, then you get to add additional performance characters. This represents that you've won the money to now invest in a little bit better modification to the engine or airfoil or whatever. And so your airplanes can slowly get better from race to race through the seasons.
Right.
And you'll be more competitive. But really it comes down to how you play and being able to track what everybody else is doing and what their traditions are and so forth. And I watched one guy at PunchCon. He naturally out of the gate, he understood that it was mainly about understanding the other players' strategies, recognizing them early, and concealing your own strategy. Mm. And so he began acting. He was like I swear, he deserved an Oscar. He was leaning back and going,
oh yeah, exactly. That's the infamous head shake that we use all the time in aerodrome. I don't know what I'm going to do here. And at least for us, the funny part is repositioning things on your pre-plotting board. Just shake your head and
he would place down the card face down what he's going to play, and he'd say, I don't know about this move. And then he'd pick it back up and he'd look at it and he'd change and he'd place down. And he knew from the beginning what he was going to do.
Yep.
And he's just swapping around and playing this act while everybody's watching, and realizing, he's got terrible things coming. Meanwhile, he's stacked himself for the victory. I watched that in awe. And the others didn't understand that they were just being played by a really expert acting player.
Yes.
So the game is a bit like that. It comes in many different forms. You can get it digitally on Wargame Vault.
Yes,
you can get it in book form on Amazon, which is really popular. We saw quite a few of them. The boxed set with the rules in the box, with all the things in the box.
Oh, yeah.
Is there. And then as an add-on, we'll be producing and selling these. And these are quite good because you can change the bank of the aircraft. It doesn't actually affect gameplay, but it looks great on the table when you.
Oh yeah. That's just cool.
The pylon on the left bank.
I'm a sucker for miniatures, but I will say the great thing with the box game as well is you get pre-cut pylons. Mm-hmm. So that's also another cool thing because I saw them like, how do those work? Oh yes, they are push fit pylons. So you're not just getting counters; you're getting in a sense some terrain for your tables.
In the book, the pylons you cut them out. And they look like this. And then you just fold them on the lines as instructed. And they look like this.
Yep.
And
super easy.
So it's quite easy. It's quite dramatic on the table.
And if you don't want to cut up your book, they're all on Board Game Geek. You can go out there and
the box sets are on Blue Panther. The book is on Amazon, and you can also just download the digital version on Wargame or Wargame Vault, and you can download the graphics on Board Game Geek, so you can print them out yourself, or you can even cut them out of the book. Although most people don't do that; they want to preserve the book as it is.
Oh, I'm that way as well. I'm not cutting up my book. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's the graphics are nice, and the pilots are all the real pilots, and
Yeah,
with
it's very nicely done. And this is why I ordered both the book and the box set, is because I've talked to the team over at Blue Panther about a variety of things, and it's cool to get to see, what it looks like when you just have the book version, and then when you have the final, boxed version,
Right.
with all those cards. It's a neat way to play through and see how things look.
You've
I
seen the
think
race plane cards, of course.
yes,
So this is the main thing, and you're choosing a pilot, to fly in this race plane, and the pilot and the race plane have different characteristics. I've sleeved my cards,
yeah,
and so on. And there's some of the most famous race planes in that era. And so I'll just show a couple more here.
Yep.
But
they're pretty cool.
If you get the miniatures, then you can paint them in your own colors if you wish.
Absolutely.
So you can use the historic colors, or you can paint them in your own colors. For instance, I took a Weddell Williams Model 44 and gave him gold wings cool. And a black fuselage, just for fun.
That is awesome.
It's a really fun looking airplane. I'm not the best with paints. I mean, guys who are plastic modelers, many of these aircraft have never been offered as modeling kits. And these are 1/100th true to scale, models. So I'm getting actually plastic modelers buying these just because they've never been able to model a Weddell Will or a Hall Springfield Bulldog, it's just not available. The layered solution is not something that you can find produced by Airfix.
That's always a funny place to be, because we're there with some of the 1/200 scale airplanes we do, because now you've taken what people normally war game with jets of a much smaller scale, but now that your F4 Phantom is 1/200 scale, you can paint some nice detail on there. The decals really bring out some of the markings. So it's always funny as people argue about scales, and we argue with the Iron Dice Gaming guys all the time, but with air racers that are actually really, really small, tiny airplanes, you've got to have a big scale model to make it visually striking on the table. Otherwise, you have this tiny little 1/300th dot.
And I will say that the air racers, these are accurate to scale against each other. Mm-hmm. The prop just fell out of that, but
it's all right.
The GB is tiny.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And
it's an itty bitty little airplane.
It's an engine with a little tiny teardrop fuselage behind it. It's yes. An unbelievably unstable, difficult plane to fly. And actually, most of them crashed and killed the pilots. Doolittle called it the most dangerous plane he'd ever flown. He was offered to fly a reproduction. He said, not a chance.
No, I'm good.
So it really was a dangerous plane. And, Kermit Weeks has a GB Model Z, and he determined that it gets wing flutter at about 200 miles an hour.
Right.
And of course, its speed is closer to 300. So you're pushing into, wing flutter the moment you're in the race, from the beginning of the race to the end. And he just determined what would be required to counterbalance the aileron and so forth to eliminate the wing flutter and make it a safe airplane. But, and they added that to his reproduction. But, at that time, we didn't even understand flutter. And it can be, basically in 1 second, you go from a beautiful flying wing in an airplane to the wing has exploded.
Yep.
And the plane is now a wreck. And these guys are racing at 100 feet of altitude and 50
there's
feet
no chance of anything. Down. Yeah, you're not jumping over the side.
And
Kermit's an interesting guy, because I've seen his collection. I've actually flown a photo shoot with him. He's an interesting cat, and there's a lot of really cool airplanes that unfortunately people do not get to see, because there's still just so much to his collection that is still in crates or still being assembled, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Amazing guy. So anyway, so these are the kinds of things. I'm getting ready to launch a printed version of Historic Wings magazine later this year.
Oh, nice.
And so we'll have many of the old stories and some new stories and photos and everything in a magazine form that I'll be doing, not as a subscription. You can just buy it as you wish. And I'm expecting to have that later on this year. This year, I've got another 5 games that are very close to finish, that one after another I'm going to push through. Some of them have been in development for 3 years. So the next one that comes out is called Lafayette. It's airborne, the 82nd Airborne at D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being done in conjunction with Helen Patton of the Patton Foundation. Helen Patton is the granddaughter of General Patton.
Right.
And she owns the Lafayette Guest House. No better place to stay in Normandy when you visit, by the way. It's right at Lafayette Bridge. And the game is a completely different take on tactical infantry combat for paratroopers. Of course, it has an aviation angle. You have to jump into the area, the combat zone. So it's that's coming out next. I've got Achtung Yabo, which is about P-47s, also on D-Day. It's you are the squadron commander of a P-47 unit and a fighter group, and you have to fly the missions that they actually flew on D-Day and see how you do compared to how they did in history. Wow. And there's many games. I have some new designs coming out later this year that are going to be there's a lot of interest already. Invictus is probably the one that people are most looking forward to. It's just announced.
We talked about that.
I showed it off at PunchedCon in England, and I've never seen an announcement go over as well as that one did.
Good.
It's a B-17 strategic bombing campaign, but it's done at the right level, and it's done historically in a way that is entirely accurate. You fly the actual missions on the routes that were assigned, on the date ranges as they were attempted to be flown based on weather. You manage your group. You have 4 squadron commanders under you. You fly 3 squadrons. The 4th squadron stays on the ground in each of the missions, unless it's a maximum effort. And you go through the entire history of the 384th Bombardment Group Heavy, from the day they arrive in England to the end of the war. Although the first game will only have the first series of missions that they fly, because it's just too much to include every mission they flew in a single game. And if it sells well, which I expect to be the case, then we'll include other missions for it as just simple mission packs, very affordable, so to add on to the experience. But it recreates the actual experience at a bomb group commander level.
Good.
Which is really the 12 o'clock high experience that everybody wants. Well,
a lot of people chase that, and and this is going to sound mean on my part, but there's a lot of games that fail to deliver on that do a lot of things around the entire bomb group commander piece, but because they are mired in either being asset management games or being roll on table games, as I'll call them, they lose the feel of all the decisions between the missions. And I think they generalize what really makes the story unique. So I'll be interested to take a look and see how it plays.
It has a completely different series of how it's played. It's completely different than any other strategic bombing game that's been developed. For instance, when you do the bombing in games like Target for Today or Target for Tonight or B-17 Queen of the Sky is the venerable title of this genre, you're kind of in a lone B-17, and it's assumed that there's a group around you and you're a part of a huge bomber stream, but your experience is you're a lone B-17. And so when the Germans attack you, 2 Messerschmitts, come in, BF-109Gs and a BF-110 come in and attack you. They make a pass, and then do they come back around and make another pass at your bombers? That's not the experience of a bomb group. It's not the experience of this individual bomber in that stream. When those guys made their pass, they fired what they fired. Most of them broke off and flew home with damaged airplanes. Those that made a second pass probably attacked a different bomber in the same, group. In the same squadron, in the same group, high, low, or lead squadron. And they really weren't in the same way. The game, it doesn't make sense as an individual bomber when you've got 1,000 plane raid going on.
Right.
The story isn't at that level. It's at the bomb group level. in those games, when you get to the target, you've rolled your way through all these tables, you get to the target, you roll once with 2d6 that says you're 20% effective. That's it. You did all this to fly there, drop your bombs, and that's it. That's all you know is you're 20% effective, and you fly back. That to me wasn't very rewarding, particularly given that when you talked with, and I've talked with many of the guys, most of them have passed away now, but over the years, that flew these missions, they took photographs. There were BDA photos taken of every bomb dropped. And those are in archives. And, they talked about what they hit and what the target was. And, that they had to come in from the southwest because, you wouldn't want to hit the cathedral, in the northeast corner of the city and so forth. And so the way we do it in Invictus is you have an abstracted equivalent of the map of Hamburg, for instance, or of a German air base that you're striking. And then depending on your formations and your squadrons, you actually know what you hit.
Novel idea. It's crazy.
Yeah, but you don't have dice rolls for each bomber, and all of this. It's more like this is our formation. We flew over. The lead navigator turned the IP wrong, and you know what happens when you turn the IP wrong? You're off target. And then the bombardier, he's then lining up, and he got the wrong winds from the lead navigator, and so actually, the bombs are going to drop 100 meters to the right. Well, what is over there? And it tells you then. You hit this residential neighborhood, and you hit the factory there. You hit the warehouse. You hit the rail yard, but you totally missed the naval facility that you were supposed to hit. But there's still victory points awarded and so on. And depending on how many bombers you have and where they are in the formation, if they're out of formation, whatever, you're going to get your results. And so it's quite involved, but it's very quick. And so in PunchCon, we played a number of missions, and most people could fly an entire mission in half an hour to 45 minutes.
Oh, nice.
And so it was very quick, very suspenseful. When the German fighters come in, it's very suspenseful. And
that's what I was going to say is as long as the tension is there, missions can be quick, and you don't need a game that is 4 hours of resolution to have that kind of tension. It can be very step through the decisions. Oh crap, this is now very serious moment to the game. Okay, I've resolved that. I'll go on. And there may or may not be another tension moment. And I think, and this is also going to sound like me throwing spears at people I shouldn't be throwing spears at, but there are a lot of games that the only tension is over the target. That everything else is just a decision. And I'm not going to pick on certain people who made games about certain people are also retired Marines that made games about some of my favorite airplanes, but those games, the only tension is in the target. You refuel or you don't refuel. There's very procedural kind of things where you just roll the dice and you're like, oh, well, that got screwed up, but there was no tension there because it wasn't a series of decisions that made my outcome. It was the dice that made my outcome. There's just not tension there.
In real aviation, real military aviation, as you well know, you win or lose the fight probably before you take off. Your plan.
Many times.
Who you assign, how you structure. That matters often more than some individual heroic act over the target.
And I will tell people it's
gaming. And I recreate all of that. That's a key part of the games that I do is that those decisions matter.
A lot of times it's external agencies. And I tell people the story of flying over Kosovo, and the mission was going to be a failure. It was going to affect further follow-on missions because our aircraft were going to be in Italy because the tanker we were assigned did not have a drogue for naval and Marine Corps aircraft to refuel from. So we show up behind a KC-135, they drop the boom, and we look at them and go, yeah, that's not helping us. And I'm running out of gas, and I'm not going to make my next time on station to actually do my mission. And I'm looking at Italy, that's where the jet is now going to spend a couple hours getting turned around, refueled, and sent back home. And so through no action of our own were we going to fail to accomplish the mission. Somebody somewhere had put the wrong tanker on the wrong track and assigned us to that track. And thankfully for us, the tanker crew was awesome. They found their buddies in another 135 with a drogue stuck on the end of their boom and sent them our way very rapidly. So we got gas and went back in and did our mission. But people don't think about that with aviation. They think about how did I lose the mission? How did I fail to get the mission accomplishment? And that's, I think, where I take so much exception, even with the construct that Ben Chi and I had in Fulcrum Leader, that I enjoyed designing the game, but I always hate it when people fly the missions and still fail to achieve the victory points because of just the deck being stacked against them. There's a certain level of victory points you get just for showing up and just for completing the mission in life. It's not necessarily whether you flattened the target or not with your weapons.
Yeah, Fulcrum Leader was a great game, by the way. So my hat is off to you.
Oh, thank you. That was building on someone else's system. That was playing in someone else's sandbox. I learned a lot because all of my other game design projects had been starting from scratch, where I controlled everything. That was having to play in somebody's sandbox with their rules and their vision of what a game should be. And I say this all the time, talking about the tension between Ben and Dan Verson and I, was that Ben had a vision, I had a vision, Dan Verson owns the actual game and the lines. So there's going to be a little bit of, as we say, rubbings racing, where we're all arguing over how do we model something and still make it a fun game. So it was a great learning experience for me. Would I do things differently? Sure. Every game designer says that when they get to their final project, but thanks for not hating the game.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Leader series is a very interesting series. There's some hacks that are player designed hacks that make it actually manageable. Yep. One of the things that bothers a lot of people is that each of the pilots by name has multiple cards.
Oh yeah.
And so, now I've gone from green to average and I have to find another card and all that. And you can't find it in the box, and you've got all of this stuff.
I've been that player.
Yeah. And one of the hacks, Rough Swordsman Wargamer, which is one of the best YouTube channels you'll find out there on Wargaming, taught me a hack where he just takes a card sleeve and he puts all 4 cards for that pilot in the card sleeve.
So don't laugh. How many years have I been playing and designing a Leader Series game? And I just did that after Fulcrum Leader published. Yeah. Because I ran across the same thing. And I don't know if he was the one that commented in the chat, but somebody brought that up on Board Game Geek. And I'm like, how did I not think of doing that? Why did I just stack them in card holders? But that is absolutely the way mine are now. They're in photo archival binders in sleeves, with the sleeve having all of the pilot's cards in them. And I just flip to whichever level they are actually at.
You go from green to average, you pull the green out and put it behind. And now
little hacks that make the game manageable, because it is. And I say it, full disclosure, contributing to the problem, putting a bazillion airplane cards, a bazillion munitions and weapons in there. If you are a person that thinks you have to have the right airplanes with the right munition to go against the right target, you will never have fun with that game. You will be in analysis paralysis for hours instead of just playing it.
To know that I have a modern air combat game that is under development. It's not announced, but it abstracts out all of those complexities in a completely new and different way.
Good.
And I think you'll find it very compelling. And it will be set in the Taiwan arena.
Oh, yeah.
And you will be a squadron commander managing your squadron. And you can lose very badly in this game.
Yeah. That will be interesting to see.
Not an easy place to defend, as you know.
Yep. So I look forward to taking a look at that one.
Very long way away. There's a very long logistics train behind it. And like it or not, our tooth to tail ratio is still not where it needs to be. We have the U.S. military doesn't look like an alligator. It looks like Godzilla with this massive body and massive tail behind a little tiny mouth.
A little small head.
And now we're going to project that power on the other side of the world, thousands of miles away, with this tail that is so heavy.
Right.
And that's the real challenge of Taiwan.
That was our failure.
A Chinese plane. It's all about the overall challenge. How do you feel the squadron achieve the missions that are assigned, get it done without losing too many of the guys, and seeing your base being annihilated by ballistic missiles and drones and other things.
Yep.
So it's
well, I tell people that was one of the failures of Operation Allied Force that is never talked about, was that the shooter to logistics ratio is what failed all of the aviation operations at the beginning of Allied Force, because there weren't enough shooters and there weren't enough bases to bring the logistics in, and there weren't enough bases to base the tankers out of. And then when NATO and the U.S. Air Force realized they didn't have enough airplanes and there were no more carriers to ask to join the fight, and they came to the Marine Corps, they had to rapidly figure out, where do we put the Marines? Where do we put these two squadrons that they're F-18s, so we think they're like F-16s? And how do we get all of their cargo that, even though the Marine Corps is an austere expeditionary force, people would be frightened to find out how many C-5 and C-17 loads it took to get us to Tazar, Hungary, with all of the stuff to deploy two squadrons. And that in and of itself is one of the reasons why targets were not struck, why the Serbian MUP, the military uniformed police, were able to commit some of the atrocities they could, because there just were not enough aviation assets to take them off the battlefield, even when you could locate them. And and so people just, they're like, how is that possible? Don't you just go over there and bomb things? I'm like, it's never that easy. It's a complex shell game.
Everybody wants to film the explosion of a 2,000-pound bomb without realizing what it took to actually get it there.
Well, and I've had that argument with Dan Verson a couple times about how things are in the Leader series. And I say, Dan, I get it, this is an asset management game. I'm like, but holy cow, just to get the assets in theater for you to be able to manage in the game is a game of its own, you know, and figuring that out. So,
but the question always comes down to, and this is the key part of all of my games, how do you abstract that out so it's not some laborious process that is going to take hours to do? Instead, you just get to the fun. You make the decisions you got to make. You get to the fun. The game is short. Now, if you play the full campaign, it really unfolds. It can be quite long. But, you can play Mag 23 in half an hour and have an amazing story.
Absolutely.
If you play all the weeks of the campaign, it might take you a few months to get through it.
Right.
But, it's a short and fun game, and each game is exciting as it is. But no one mission is ever going to win the war. That's the first tier lesson of aviation history. No one mission ever won the war.
Exactly. I say that with all my friends that supposedly either took people like Chemical Ali or any of those out of the fight, and then a week later, those same guys were on TV. So he said, well, we didn't win the war with that mission. But no, absolutely. And I think it's fascinating. One of the things I do like specifically about Speed Kings and Mag 23 is that, just like you say, the game itself can be quick. The campaign can be as long as you want. You can play a full season in Speed Kings, and that drives a replayability to me that is awesome, because you're not tied to a super long game. But if you want to meet with your gaming group every Monday, or if you take a couple hours to play a couple games through, you can play a campaign over whatever time you want it to be. Because it doesn't have to remain set up. You've recorded the data. You know where your pilots are. You know where your airplanes are. And it's a fascinating way to step through a campaign without, as old grognards like you and I remember, having our map boards laid out and putting plexiglass over it or something to make sure that the cat didn't destroy your Battle of Stalingrad.
Right. Yeah. I've actually had a few requests for game maps for Speed Kings, because it's just played on a tabletop.
Yeah.
You lay down.
I like that there's no map to it. I think that's cool.
Had a few people say, I really want a map. Can you do, at Miami airfield, that we're flying over and so on. It's like, I could do a map board like thing, but there's no hexes on it. There's no markers on it. It's just sort of a vertical picture of the ground. Oh yeah, do that, please. Okay. I might have to do that now. I've had
It's funny, the chrome that gamers clock in on, and every gamer is different, and there are things that really appeal to them that other people couldn't care less about, but that can be both game breaking and an incentive to play the level that you invest in those things. And it's always funny when people say that about maps, because to me, I'm an old SPI Avalon Hill player. We remember our very generalized, stylized maps, and we probably thought that Squad Leader was the fanciest maps that were ever going to be out there. And now you get into game boards with such beautiful maps that I sit there and I go, oh my gosh, this is light years ahead of where we grew up playing these games.
Yeah, Black Flight, the map is actually behind me on the wall. It's area movement for the strategic level. That map is assembled from 9 historic maps from the spring and summer of 1917. It's exactly the time period. So you can actually, with a magnifying glass, go into the map and see the individual trenches and the names of the trenches.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
And so it's all on there. And I don't know very many other games that have that level of detail available in the components, but I try to do that. That's obviously
I'm glad you did.
Blow up size of.
Oh, yeah.
But,
cool.
I've had people, you can download the map on Board Game Geek and take a look at it. I've had people, they print it out on fabric through some of the, production houses, and it costs them $25 to get this beautiful, tablecloth size map that they play on, and they love that. That's cool. It is quite, interesting. And so I've had one guy sent me a picture of his setup where he had the map on the wall. He mounted it on the wall of his game room, and he has on like corkboard, and he has the squadron, the counters to move on the map on pins, and he just moves.
Oh, that's nice. Yep.
And since it's fabric, it doesn't create a hole. It goes in the fabric. When you pull it out, the fabric smooths out, and there's no hole there anymore. So really brilliant thinking. I never would have thought of doing that, But so we have a lot of people that bling out their games. There's guys playing SOE Lysander have Lysander models on the table, and everything laid out and so on. And it really adds to the experience of playing the game. It really does. So That's awesome. I'm always amazed what people come up with, and I think it's really an extraordinary honor to be able to give them games that they like to play and that they learn from. So the games are about learning. Games are about history. And it puts you in the seat of the decision maker.
Well, that's what we really enjoy at Lead Pursuit. We've talked about it so many times that we enjoy games where you have that agency, and it doesn't require a historical lecture to grasp the concepts that are in the game. That there are a number of war games that you will just not get if you have not done your history research beforehand. And it's refreshing to get games that give you that dose of history with the replayability and an ability to go through and say, oh, wait, I need to go read more about this, and then come back and replay the game and say, yeah, I'll make some different decisions. That's super cool to me. Yeah. So that means I got to spend more time playing Mag 23 and doing all these things. But we've been talking for quite a while. Yes. Long episode for my listeners this time.
Well, I expect that you'll edit it down as you choose.
That's fine. I'm always happy to put a lot of content out there for people who don't necessarily get out there and see some of these games and get to see them played. But where can people find you around the interwebs? What are the easiest places to find you?
historicwings.com. My email address is even there. All of my games are on Amazon worldwide in box form. They're from Blue Panther. Earlier, I would do the book-based games, and then just the assets were available in boxed form. So you would buy the book, and then you'd buy the assets, or you could make your own if you want to go cheap, because they're very affordable as books, as you know. You can also just get them on War Game Vault, some of them. I'm going to be adding all of the older ones on there. Into War Game Vault, so you can get them digitally as PDFs, watermarked PDFs. So you have many places, many ways that you can acquire and play the game, depending on whether you're crafty and can make your own counters and maps, or if you just want to buy the maps as box sets. All of them have box sets of components. So, but be careful that you don't buy the box set of components and then say, where are the rules? Because, you bought the box set of components, not the rules. So be careful which one you buy. Some of them we will be adding all the rules into the box sets as well over the next year. But of course, we're backing in there's 8 or 9 games already that are available, and I'll have another 5 out before the end of this year. So it's a lot of ways to play. So.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing the new titles, and as things reach that point where you want to talk about them, please reach out to us. We're always happy to have you on the podcast and talk through all of the different titles that are out there and what the projects are. So thanks for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's been a great honor, sir. And thank you for your service in the Marine Corps. I'm deeply impressed by everything that you guys do.
Well, thank you. I just laugh. I tell people who say that, I'm like, it's kind of like thanking a gambler for playing the craps table. I enjoyed every minute of it. It may have been rolling the dice multiple times per day, but I did enjoy my 20 years in the Marine Corps. But, I will also throw out to the rest of the podcast team who couldn't join me tonight. Sorry to Brett and Steve and those guys who didn't want to make I shouldn't say tonight, this morning, to the early morning get up. But we will be back with the rest of the team with our regular features, hopefully complaining as we usually do, and complaining about grognards and complaining about game rules and getting ready for Historicon here in July. So thanks, Thomas. Appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you. See you.